Hey guys, Justin here with JHart Modelworks, coming to you with another update on the Revell 1970 Pontiac Firebird that we're building for Pops next door, as well as on the Monogram 1960 Dodge Super Bee that we're building as a memorial for Mitchel of Insomnia Hobbies. We've got a bit of work done, a little bit, not a whole lot, but we do have some work done. We've got the engine started on both of these kits. We did run into a mishap. We will talk about that. But for right now, let's go ahead and get the camera flipped around and take a look at where we're at. All right, guys, we're recording from the garage. There's a lot of noise in the house right now. So, we've got a lot of progress done on the Pontiac engine. So we did mix our own custom mix of Pontiac Engine Blue. I did it completely wrong. I started out with a half mil of the LP6. Then I started adding a few drops at a time of the LP4 flat white. Before you know it, I was adding like half mil here, half mil there. There's like 3 or 4 mil of white paint to get a baby blue from this blue. What I should have done is started with a half mil of the white, and then just start adding a few drops of the blue, get your nice light baby powder blue, then start adding in LP48 sparkling silver until you get the silver that you want. As it is, like I said, it's perfect, it's beautiful, but I've got enough paint to mix up. I can paint like a good 3, maybe 4 more engines with the amount of paint I ended up mixing up here. And the whole point of mixing my own was I didn't want a whole lot of paint because I don't build a lot of Pontiac cars, but it is what it is. I cut off the oil filter because I didn't like their oil filter. It didn't really look very well, and it was all the detail was very soft. It was just like a round blob that came out. There was no definition to it at all. So we have gone in and 3D printed one after cutting off the old one. A few other problems in there. The definition for the starter is completely non-existent. It just goes straight down into the side of the body. So I went in with the scriber and started scribing a line, and then started taking my chisels and started chiseling it into a round shape to give that a lot more definition so you can see it. It looks like it's an actual separate part. We did the same thing up here with the fuel pump. This just goes all the way across straight into the side of the engine. So we went in with the chisels and the hobby knife and just started carving away at it and then reshaping the fuel pump to get a nice round shape so it looks at least like it's a separate part there. We've added an electrical diode to replicate out a fuel filter. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right in there. And I did end up 3D printing my own distributor, and that's just because I wanted to be able to wire this really well. With my own 3D printed distributor, I don't have to fight with drilling it. I can do it so that the holes are already there, and then I can easily put plugs into the exact spot instead of just having a mass of wires in the center and kind of make it look right. Because I have exact positions, I'm actually able to wire this engine up in the correct firing order. We did use some photo etch wire looms from ProTech. Love Charlie's stuff from ProTech. His wire looms really make a nice clean engine. Once you strip the chrome, because I did strip the chrome off and I redid it with Duralumin Tough, which you can get off of Etsy. You can only get it on Etsy from the Digital Armory. But once you strip it, these valve covers have some really beautiful definition that you don't see with the kit chrome. Like that, the oil fill cap is beautiful. And with the kit chrome on and that thick clear layer they've got under the chrome, you can't see it at all. This just looks like a smooth like lump. And that's almost non-existent, that lump for the breather. It's beautiful as well. Now I did go ahead and drill it, and I added some ProTech heater hose, which I just glued in and bent over and ran over towards the carburetor. It actually goes up into the air filter. And speaking of the air filter, I went ahead and added a 2mm magnet in the center of because there's a hole that goes deep down into the carburetor, and it's large enough that you can just glue a magnet straight down in there. I then, on the bottom, there's a knob that is supposed to go in that hole to line everything up. Now, I drilled the center out with a 2mm hole, and just to give me a nice alignment point, and then I removed that knob and I glued in there's actually a couple of magnets glued together in there to get the depth. One is actually glued into the base and the other one's glued on top to give me my nub to realign everything. So that just goes on right like that. Beautiful hold. And then if Pops wants, he can take this off and look at his engine. Like I said, we did run that fuel filter. That runs all the way up into the carb. And we've added in a Mr. Model. Let's see if we can zoom in on that enough. Yeah, there's a return spring from Mr. Model. I got that at the Pistons and Paint show last year as a door prize. I got a set of these. Now, I don't really know how to use these very well. What I should have done is cut this about in half and stretched it out a little bit more so it would look more spring-like, but it is what it is. It looks good enough to me. And then I came to the sudden realization that I messed up. I ordered the wrong pulley set from Off the Sprue from Mark over there. I was looking at the pulleys. There they are. So I was looking at the pulleys and I was counting the pulleys, and there's 4 pulleys. So I went and found a set that had 4 pulleys, but I wasn't really paying good attention to the belts because it pretty much looks kind of like, if you're just not paying attention, it looks like it's just one big belt, but I wasn't paying attention to the crossover here. This is a 2-belt pulley setup. So I needed pulleys that have a double setup on them. And the ones I have are just singles, so they don't look right at all. And that's because we have our power steering pump down in here, and we have the alternator. I'm not a huge fan of this power steering pump or the alternator. At least the alternator has a bracket, but that bracket doesn't connect to anything. It still floats in midair. I may replace this with a Mr. Model, and then I'm going to have to figure out something. I may put a metal pin in the back of this or something, because honestly, the power steering pump would, in fact, connect up to the block somewhere that actually turns this. So, yeah. We'll see what happens with that once we get the new pulleys in from Mark. The next problem we have is the wheels. I did get my paint in from Splash Paints. This is his new paint called Gold Bronze, and this is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous wheel paint. I mean, that is fantastic. The problem, though, is that now everything is painted up. I was able to test fit everything, and I realized that there's some issues. When you go 3D printing parts, and this is why I like having my own parts. Sorry, the air conditioner is running, so it's going to be really loud now. But when you buy 3D printed parts, you have no control over sizes. Because I have my own 3D printer and I do my own parts and I know how to do this somewhat, I can actually reprint these after I make some changes. But my setup drops straight into place. And there are 2 issues. The first issue is that when you look at this, that is way too much gap between these wheels and the side of the body. When you look at the actual kit wheels, one, the tire is thicker, but also this nub sticks out past that tire by a good 2 millimeters, which pushes these wheels out further. So I'm going to reprint them, and I need to extend that out so that it will push these wheels out and sit them out about like that. The other issue that I have with these wheels, so I rescaled these. These are 19s. That by default, they come as 19s from the guy who designed them. I rescaled the back to 21s. But that is a huge gap between the wheels and the fender. Now these are 19s. The kit wheels are 17s, but the sidewall profile is a lot thicker between these and these. So the wheel actually ends up being at least 1 millimeter shorter. Now what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to rescale these down to 17s so that they will fit inside this tire. I will also need to make them a little bit wider so that they fit the width of the tire. But there's also a lip in here. So if you look at these, there's an indent where it goes inside that little ridge. My 3D printed wheels won't have that indent. So I'm gonna have to come in here with a hobby knife and just scrape this until I get it completely flat so that when I put my 3D printed wheel in, it'll sit flush inside the tire and it'll look right. Instead of shrinking it down and then having a big gap around the wheel, that would look terrible. So we are going to use these tires and not 3D printed ones, and then we're just going to resize them down to 17s, and it should look a lot better. I'm still not overly in love with that height, but that's the natural height according to the kit. So, and that still looks significantly better than this. Or, oh no, that's the rear. These are my 21s. The 21s are still smaller. I think these are the actual 19. Yeah, there's the 19s. So yeah, you can see that gap is insane. So we do have plans to fix it. It's just going to take me a little bit of time to do it, and it should be easy enough to fix. Now, as far as the Super Bee goes, we've done a lot of work, but we don't have a whole lot done. We have started on the engine, and we've run into some issues with the engine. Now I'm trying to keep this engine because now I could just 3D print an engine. Motoboss makes a 440 and I could just print it up, and I actually am printing one up right now as a backup plan. But I found that sometimes Monogram and Revell's scale is less 1/24th and more 1/24th-ish. When I was doing the 37 Ford, I had to shrink the engine. I replaced the engine with one of the Motoboss flatheads. And I found that I actually had to shrink it past the correct scaling to get it to actually fit correctly with the body and the frame. And so I'm looking at some of these parts and I'm finding some scaling discrepancies here as well. So I'm trying to keep this, but one of the big issues that I've found is that the parts of the engine don't line up correctly. So it's like everything feels like it's shifted like this, except when you look at important details like the engine mount points, they're all in the correct place. So there is a mounting pin here, and then there's a mounting stub here and here on both sides of the engine. These line up perfectly with the engine mounts on the chassis. So the molding is correct, it just doesn't line up. You can see that there's a significant amount of putty on here. That's because this side is almost 1 millimeter thinner than this side over here. So I had to add putty to flush out and line up the seams on the top and the bottom. Sorry, there's a plane coming, please hold. Sorry about that, I live next to Mitchel Airport and they're pretty busy today. And then there was some issues, again, the oil pan is kind of the same way. Nothing really quite lines up correctly. There's massive seam differences and things like that. So one of the big things that I did was I glued everything together. I have puttied up these ends and I cut the oil pan off. I'm going to be using a 3D printed oil pan off of the Motoboss engine, which has much cleaner detail. I had to do some creative scaling to get this to line up correctly. But I do have one and it lines up very, very nicely. So, I mean, you look at this and that compared to that. Yeah. Another problem was the starter. I mean, the starter was cartoonishly too large. It comes out like half the length of the engine block. So I had to come in and I cut out the entire starter, and that left a big gaping hole in the side of the engine. So I added in some styrene, glued that in with some Tamiya extra thin, backed it up with a little bit of CA glue just for a little added strength. And then I've used the Tamiya polyester putty to fill all that in and clean all this up. So we are going to take the Motoboss starter and we will be putting that in here. So just a comparison, just a rough comparison. On the size, that's significantly shorter than coming all the way out here. The other problem with it is not only did it come this far out, but it was just a straight line. So it was just a big round cylinder that had like a straight line straight to the side of the engine. There was no definition, just like on the Firebird. It looked really bad, but rather than cutting this and carving and cleaning it up, I chose to just straight up cut this off and replace it. Looks like I still have a little bit more sanding to do to finish cleaning this up and get this nice and flush, but we'll get that taken care of. Another issue that we have are the carbs. And these aren't bad, don't get me wrong. These are not bad. These are the carbs for Motoboss. And again, scaling wise, these don't line up. So I'm playing with the scaling, trying to shrink them down a bit. We'll see what I end up going with, but we'll basically make this work. But these are gonna look a lot nicer than this. I'm gonna be using my valve covers. And we have the heads in here. Now, another issue that we are going to have is with the exhaust. So you get your heads in place. Your spark plugs should be going down here, right along that bottom edge. But the way they molded these exhausts, the exhaust is completely flat. There's no definition to the exhaust. Now, I do want to keep the exhaust because the exhaust comes down and lines up perfectly with the exhaust on the chassis. And I just don't want to mess with that and have them trying to, custom make something to fit. But when you put these in place, because there's a nub here and a nub here that lines up with these two nubs down here. There's almost no room down there for the spark plugs. So I can't really pre-drill these, which is what I would like to do, is just pre-drill them and then go in and paint everything up and assemble. I'm going to actually have to paint everything up, assemble it, get the exhaust pipes in place. Then I'm going to come back in and drill my spark plug holes after the fact and try to wire this up. Another issue that I have with this engine, and it's pretty much just me being picky. You guys know I can be kind of picky. But the front cover has some issues. There's no lower radiator hose location. The top of the water pump where the upper radiator hose connects to is just that. and the hose is just a plastic rod that goes down into it. It's not very nice. So we're going to be customizing some of that as well. And then there's this oil filter. The oil filter just, I don't know how exactly that's filtering any oil at all, because that's just a nub sticking out in space with a hole in it. So we're going to cut this off, and that fuel pump isn't the greatest quality either, but I've got some plans for that. On the Motoboss kit, we have his fuel pump, which looks really pretty nice. And it has openings in there where I can stick the end of my diode so I can have my fuel filter. And we also have, this is the mount point for the oil filter. So you actually have the connector where it actually pumps the oil in and out, and then his filter to go with it. So that's going to look a lot better. Here is an example of one of those things where it's like scaling is a question. This is 1/24th properly scaled, the distributor for the 440 from the Motoboss kit. That's the kit distributor. Look, that is significantly way too small. So again, I've been playing with some scaling on. I've got one of these that's scaled down to try and make it fit a little better. We're going to see which one I like and play with it. So we are going to try really hard to keep this engine block just for the sake of the mount points and making sure that everything fits properly inside the hood. But like I said, as a backup plan, I am already 3D printing out a copy of Motoboss's engine to build up alongside. And worst case scenario, we will just cut the engine block straight off this trans. That will give us at least one mount point that we know will be solid so that our drive shaft will fit properly. And then we'll just glue this to his engine and see if it lines up. But that's plan B. We're hoping, crossing our fingers, that plan A works. All right, guys, so that is going to be a wrap for this one. So I do have a new set of pulleys ordered from Off the Sprue. He has already shipped them. He shipped them like the next day. They are in customs right now, so they are in the US. Just hoping they release those soon. We do have a little bit more progress on the Super B engine than what is in this video, but it's not quite ready where I'm ready to show you yet. It's not even really as far as the Firebird engine. So we are going to go ahead and keep working on those, as well as maybe start the interior. I don't know. This Friday, November the 1st, I'm going to have, well, by the time you see this, I will have had a tooth extracted. I had a sinus infection that went south into my gums and it just went bad. So I'm not really going to be in the mood to do much this weekend. And then next weekend, the 7th through the 10th, my wife and I are going to take a small trip down to San Antonio, a small little mini vacation, just the two of us. I do plan on getting to visit Mike from Mike's Miniature Motors sometime next weekend. That will be awesome. I've known him online for quite a while. It'll be really cool to actually meet him in person. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to getting some more work done on these models and getting up to you with another update. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I always appreciate you watching the videos and hanging out and building with me. And like always, I'll catch you on the next one.